Professor Tim Pychyl from Carleton University is a retired professor in the field of psychology, but he is a world expert in the field of procrastination. He even wrote a best-selling book which called Solving the Procrastination Puzzle, which means that it is very important to listen to what Tim has to say about procrastination, because, as Tim put it, it is more emotional than cognitive defect. And we will dive into this later on in the conversation. Professor Tim Pychyl, how are you? Thank you so much for coming today.
It's my pleasure, Roy. Very good to meet you. And yes, I hope we do take apart that last statement you made, because cognition and emotion always dance together. What I want to say right from the outset is it's less about time management. Everyone thinks, oh, I'm such a terrible time manager. I'm a procrastinator. I hope by the end of our conversation, we'll convince you that there's a lot more going on psychologically than you having a time management problem. And if I add one more thing, I would say time management is necessary, but not sufficient. And that's a good way to set us up for today.
Necessary, but not sufficient. You know, I think 2 years ago, I wrote a book about how to ace your studies in Hebrew. It's called Hatzlacha Balimudim, but there is a whole chapter dedicated to procrastination. And I have Pierre Steele and Rita Emmett and all the other, there are many scholars in the field that deals with procrastination, because I think this is a very important topic to touch upon, because we all suffer. I never met a man that said, I don't suffer a bit from procrastination. Did you ever encounter such a man?
Well, that's a loaded question. I would say that I'm very close to that now as an individual, because I know too much about it to let myself off the hook. And I have a lot of very powerful strategies to keep me acting on my intentions as I planned. So you're absolutely right. I think it's a bit like saying, have you ever met anyone who's never been sad? But in fact, we can do a lot about that. And so I think it's common human nature, as you say, to procrastinate, to put things off. But I do think we can put it mainly behind us.
We have Ellen DeGeneres with this great quote, procrastinate now. But you said, I know too much about it to be to fall, and I know the strategies. But in the history of philosophy, we distinguish between the school of Plato and Socrates and the school of Aristotle. And the idea, you can make a lot of distinctions, but one distinction is that according to Socrates and Plato, if you know what the right thing to do, you will do it. And if you didn't do it, it means that you didn't know enough, okay? Or you didn't actually know. But Aristotle, which was, I guess, spoke with many normal people, spoke about acrasia, the idea that you know something, but nevertheless, you can't do it, okay? Right. And therefore, we have the golden line and many other things from Aristotle. Knowing is not enough. And you said just 2 minutes ago, I know too much about procrastination, but it seems to me that you are not in the Plato school, you're more in the Aristotle school. So could you please reconcile the two?
That's a very good insight and a great way to put it. But let me go back to Ellen DeGeneres for just a minute, because you started there. You can't see it. It's above my head. There's a map just over my shoulder on the wall, just like there's a map in the room you're in. And above it, it says, live now, procrastinate later. So I also have a wonderful saying that I love that way. And so you're right. If knowing would solve things, the world would be a different place than it would have been for thousands of years. That said, when you develop insight and strategies, it's not just knowing about, but it's knowing how. And the knowing how is more Aristotelian. I've certainly done research to demonstrate what I think are what we know about why we put things off. But I'm not trying to be overly simplistic and say, sure, once you know things, this problem solved. If that were the case, then libraries would have ended world strife a long time ago. Yeah.
So again, I had Barry Schwartz on the show, and he spoke about practical wisdom. And I think the idea is, again, is to combine the theoretical intelligence with, okay, what are some practices to do the right thing? But before we dive even more, in your opinion, or from your research, you are obviously in the field of psychology, but if I want to shift a little bit to the field of history, when do we first, as a civilization, encounter procrastination for the first time? So do we also have like scripture from the ancients? I know that there are very ancient Jewish scripture that deals with this problem, but do we also have like other philosophers who dealt with procrastination? Marcus Aurelius, maybe?
Well, that's a big question. You did touch on it in some ways with the notion of acrasia, and weakness of will. Some people would say that this is the same as procrastination, but not all philosophers will. Certainly, we've seen in Egyptian culture, there's a notion that there's a time to plant and a time to sow and a time to harvest. And if you miss the flood cycles of the Nile, you were in trouble. It was a serious mistake. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, particularly the Christian tradition, which I know better, we see sermons being given hundreds and hundreds of years ago about not putting off one's repentance and turning to God. So these notions are around for a long time. And I'm embarrassed to say that I can't recall off the top of my head the actual things. One of my students finished a PhD originally from Iran, and he dealt with some of the origins in his own culture in terms of ancient roots of procrastination. So that would be the quickest way for me to answer that. Yes, it's part of the human condition. We've known it for as long as we've known that there's a gap often between intention and action. I said I was going to do something and I didn't.
I think you know that there is a great Hebrew phrase which goes like this: "En aveda ke avedat zman," but there is nothing is more horrible to lose than to lose your time. And in ancient Jewish tradition, if I steal something from you, I can always return it back. But if I steal your time, I can't return back your time, which means that this conversation should be very important, because we have I don't know, over 2,000 hours of people time. Okay. When I upload a conversation, when Ali Abdal upload a conversation, it's 100,000 hours of people time. You should be very careful with this asset. Okay.
Absolutely. This is a very important point. And another great place before we get into the details of research to say, for me, I've been interested in this area primarily because it is such a deeply existential issue. Time is the non-renewable resource in our lives, and we don't even know how much of it we're going to get. So certainly we see that in many world religions, this notion of sloth or wasting time as a sin, because it's something, as you said so well, when we take it from someone else, you can't return it. And you don't even know how much you're going to get personally. So when I think about why would I want to understand procrastination better, it's because it can get in the way of us actually living the lives we want to live. This is not a dress rehearsal. These are our lives. And so how is it we can make the most of it, right? And that's what a great way to set up our conversation.
Okay, so where do you want to begin? With procrastination versus delay, or with intention versus action?
Let's start with the delay and procrastination.
Okay, so let me give you my view, and this will be your view. I always distinguish between depressed and sad. I don't know if this is the correct terms in English, but in Hebrew there is dikaon and atzvut. So depressed and sad. And what I say is, if you're sad, there is a reason why you're sad. Your dog just died. You are sad. Depression is being sad with no reason, with not sufficiently good reason. And I think that this distinction can be applied to procrastination versus delay. If I delay, if I postpone the the action of something for a good reason, this is a delay. Okay. Mm-hmm. But if I do it for a bad reason, this will come procrastination. So please give me your take on that, because in all your podcast interviews and in your book, this delay versus procrastination appear over and over and over again.
Yes. Well, I think you mentioned in your book that you wrote for students about studying, you brought in a lot of different scholars, and I think I heard you mention Pierce Steele.
Pierce Steele and Rita Emmett.
Yes, and he gave us a good definition, working definition, even in his own PhD thesis on procrastination, that procrastination is the voluntary delay of an intended action despite expecting to be worse off for the delay. So when we're starting with the notion of how do we contrast delay with procrastination, well, procrastination is a form of delay, but inherent in it, it's a self-defeating delay. We are voluntarily delaying. It's like I'm not being forced to delay. It's just me choosing to delay, and I'm choosing to do so even though I'm aware, it goes back to that earlier notion of acrasia, even though I'm aware this is not in my best interest, that I made this intention to do something sooner, and now I'm going to delay it. So that's the fundamental distinction here between procrastination and delay, that procrastination is a form of delay, but it's a negative form of delay. Now, there's other forms of delay that we define in our research. Dr. Mohsen Hagban did this in his doctoral research. We talked about purposeful delay. And that's the kind of thing you mentioned at the beginning. I say, well, I'm going to put this off because I could use some help and there's no help around me right now. Or I'm going to put this off, and any good reason. You're right. There's a reason, logic. And we can call it practical reason. Given my practical reason, this is, all things considered, this is what I should do. And then there's inevitable delay. Imagine that today my internet services went down. We would delay our interview today. And we'd both laugh and say it's inevitable. Whenever we're depending on technology to take us across the world, these things inevitably can happen. And many other things. Yeah, well, I'd had to put my dogs outside because I figured, inevitably the post person will come to the door and the dogs will bark, and it'd be best if they weren't in the house. So that's another form of delay. And yet another is delay due to emotional problems. And this gets a little bit into thinking about sadness and depression. But when my father died, and I use this example often because it's so memorable for me, and his picture is right here. When he died, things didn't get done in my life for a little while. But never did I say, oh, Tim, you're such a terrible procrastinator, because I was having self-regulation problems because I was sad, maybe depressed, right? And so things cannot get done. Now, I'm going to add two more things before we go back to you. And that is, you said it always has to have a reason, but they're not always good reasons. Mohsen also came up with notions of hedonistic delay. So you're delaying so you can have fun instead. Arousal delay. Some people say, oh, and I hope we talk about this because I don't believe this at all. I work better under pressure. They seem to thrive on the last minute efforts. So there's other forms of delay there too that aren't so purposeful, that lead to problems. And so all of these are in our lives. And if I can just close by this thing by one statement, that is, all procrastination is delay, but not all delay is procrastination, and delay is in our lives. Like, delay happens. Yeah.
Okay. Now you said something about that if there is logic, if there is a good reason, and and I tend to distinguish between like good mind and bad mind, which means that the mind, it's like the idea of Schopenhauer, the mind is just a tool for the will, and the will can take this great tool of the intellect, and if you're smart, you come up with great excuses for anything. Okay.
Yes.
And again, the intellect being the servant of the will. And my question is, does this happen in procrastination? What I mean is, when I procrastinate, if I'm very smart, do I tend to give myself excuses or, made up logic explanations why this is so important? Or again, since this is such an emotional thing, no, even I, when I'm very smart and I can fool myself in the idea of procrastination, I know that there is no logic behind it.
I do think self-deception is common amongst people who are procrastinating. In fact, John Perry, an emeritus philosopher from Stanford University, he has the notion of structured procrastination, and we can get into that if you want. But in that, he talks about the fact that it involves a bit of self-deception, but don't worry, procrastinators are very good at self-deception. We do all sorts of things in our lives. Some of our most recent research before I retired, we looked at compensatory acts. We see it a lot in dieting. Someone on a diet, compensatory acts and compensatory beliefs. So someone on a diet will say, yeah, I know I'm on a diet, but so I'm going to eat the chocolate bar now, but
just
I'm
a
going
second,
to have...
could you please explain what compensatory act is? I know what compensatory education is, but...
Okay, compensatory belief or compensatory action.
Yes.
I can make up for this. I can compensate. And in that is the self-deception.
Okay.
So I can compensate for eating the chocolate bar now by promising to eat a salad later. Now, whether I do remains to be seen. And I think we'd see the same thing in procrastination. And people see this in their own lives and wonder about themselves. I don't want to do my report, my writing, or some task. You pick any task. And as your listeners are listening now, they can think, what am I putting off? And then we find ourselves cleaning the house instead, for example. So why is it we're not just going out to have fun, but instead we're doing something else? And in a sense, we argue that this is a compensation.
We have guilt.
Well, that's right. It can assuage our guilt to some extent. We can say, well, I didn't do my report today, and we've internalized mother, but my mother would still think I'm a good boy because I cleaned the house, right? We compensated for our sins, if we use that word that we had talked about earlier in terms of wasting time. So I do think there's a great deal of self-deception that goes on. Some of our earliest studies in the 1990s, we used an experience sampling approach where we put pagers on students, because this was before they had phones. And experience sampling just means we're tracking them across time and we're signaling to them, can you tell me what you're doing? Can you tell me what you're feeling? Can you tell me what you're thinking? And it's an interesting way to collect data. And what we found in terms of this idea of deception is that early in the week when they were procrastinating on an assigned task, they'd say things like, oh, I work better under pressure, or, oh, I'll feel more like doing it tomorrow. But later in the week, when we paged them and collected data from them, and they were finally doing their work at the last minute, no one was saying things like, oh, I'm so glad I waited to the last minute because I work so much better under pressure. They were saying things like, this isn't as bad as I thought. Why did I wait so long? I could do so much better job if I'd started earlier. So self-deception is right in there. Yeah.
This is great. I will use it. Oh, this is great. You know, your examples, like my mother will be happy if I clean the room. And it seems so childish, but the amazing thing is they are true. They are 100% true. And this student can be 28 and he doesn't live with his mother for the last 10 years. It doesn't matter. You know, the biological, psychological mechanisms that operate us sometimes are so, I don't have another word from stupid, but it seems that, you know,
it's a great word. Yeah.
There is, you know, there is David in, I don't know how to say, Palms said, the man is so noble. I think it also in Shakespeare, how noble is man? The man is so noble, but in other aspect, in the same chapter, the man is like a worm. You know, the gap between what you could be and what you are. And I think that procrastination is a great manifestation of how bad we can be in not doing what we are meant to do. Okay.
Yes. You know, I wanted to add to that. One of my favorite meditation teachers is Joseph Goldstein. And Joseph talks a lot about the mind. And he said, I remember in one interview, he said this a few times in various talks. What he's learned is the mind has no shame. And I think we see that with the excuses that we can make for any sort of behavior, procrastination included. And it always makes me smile when I think of Joseph saying, "Oh, the mind has no shame." Yes.
Joseph Goldstein, a Jewish meditation teacher. This is great.
Yes, he brought the East to the West in
Uh,
North America. He's famous for that.
okay, now I think that let's move on to the evolutionary sides of procrastination. I think
Hmm.
Rita Emmett put it very clearly. I don't have the exact quote, but it goes like this: that procrastination is a great mechanism for us to avoid things that we are don't want to do, that you are afraid of doing. There is a great research that asks people, what do they think about doing math problems as homeworks? And in this research, they said that the fear of just thinking of doing homework was much worse than doing homework. When you
Oh,
sat
yes.
down, it wasn't so bad. So again, I don't want to go into this glamour magazine and say maybe procrastination is good, but I can
Don't.
understand. I can understand the mechanism, like Rita Emmett put it. I can understand the mechanism, and maybe this is a very efficient biological mechanism.
Hmm.
That
Well, we use avoidance to cope, and so you're right. If we run away, fight or flight, we can. It's a survival mechanism in many situations, but it's not very good with relation to the kind of things we procrastinate on. So it's one thing to flee, whenever someone talks about evolutionary psychology, we always talk about the saber-toothed tiger in some silly way. It's one thing to escape the bear or the tiger by fleeing, but to try to escape the task at hand is
at
inherently,
college.
yes, and I'll use your wonderful world, is entirely stupid, right? That it, because it doesn't go away. You're just postponing it and making a worse problem. From an evolutionary perspective, what I like to borrow is on the things like what David Buss would say, and I think he's been one of your guests at one
I
point.
had him on the show. What a great privilege.
Yeah, I think so. I've only met him once back when he was at the University of Michigan. I really admire him a great deal. And he wasn't doing as much evolutionary psychology then. And in fact, he's known of saying things like, we have a Stone Age brain running around in a modern world. And I think when I think about evolutionary psychology and its relation to procrastination, I think more of that we have this brain that was used to a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Like life was lived in the moment. You look at ancient cultures and they starved to death often, right? Life was hand to mouth. Now, in our modern world, we all live in a world where you can book an airline ticket a year from now and 365 days later show up at that airport and get on an airplane because all of this is happening in the background. Well, our ancient brain isn't really wired so well for that. And so our coping mechanisms are quite inefficient. The avoidance doesn't make sense. So that's where I'd start with that.
This is very good because I think Dan Gilbert in his Stumbling on Happiness, started the book with how human differ from apes, and he say, I'm going to take a shot and say in planning ahead. Okay, apes or other forms of animal don't plan ahead. So, but if you please can expand a little bit about why the notion that we can plan so much ahead, mortgage like 30 years plan ahead is so deeply connected to the mechanism of procrastination, because procrastination say, okay, just don't do it now, and maybe the task will go away. Could
Well,
could
that's
you
true.
please
It could.
elaborate on?
Yeah, that this is a very wide open place to elaborate. I hope we'll come back to Dan Gilbert because he's taught me a lot about mechanisms for procrastination as well. But this notion of human beings as planful agents is crucial. We're social beings and we're planful and we're driven by our goals. But I was struck by earlier how you said that just the thought of what we have to do can evoke all these negative emotions in us. And for me, the heart of procrastination is that we have these negative emotions related to a task. And we've learned that we can get rid of the negative emotions if we get rid of the task. And so that to me is the underlying mechanism of procrastination. It's a failure for emotion regulation. So I don't deal with the negative emotions that are associated with the task. Instead, I get rid of the task. So short-term gain and long-term pain. That's what I think is happening there. But it doesn't completely answer everything you put on the table.
I think one can say, okay, this is a great mechanism if you're afraid of doing math problems. But again, procrastination, or people who tend to procrastinate, doing it in various fields. So it's not just that they don't like math. Maybe let me put it differently. Do we know, or are we familiar in the research with people who are only procrastination or only procrastinator in one specific field, in one specific domain?
Oh, definitely. Now, I have to add this caveat, this big warning that most of the academic research, like so much of social psychology, is done with students. So it fits your interest in the kind of book you've written quite well, because we know a lot about students' lives. But we do know, for example, that many students only procrastinate on their schoolwork, and they're very good employees, and they're training for athletics, and they're not missing any practices. But when it comes to their schoolwork, that's coming off the rails. And the opposite can be the case, where you've got a very studious person who knows that they should have some health behaviors in their lives, and they're putting off going to the gym. So yes, it can be very situation specific. Not surprisingly, if we can think about procrastination as a trait, it's always person and situation. And so the trait won't be the only thing that dominates, nor does the situation. They work together much like nature via nurture. They're always dancing together.
Let me, please, with your permission, deviate a little bit from this conversation, because
Sure.
my wife just entered the room, and 2 years ago we did a Big Five test, and in the industriousness, she scored 99%. Okay,
Wow.
which means whenever she wants to do something, she does it instantly. Yes. And whenever she asks me to do something and I'm not doing it instantly, she thinks that, wow, you don't love me. So really, there is a world expert on procrastination. Please come. Okay.
I better be a world expert in marriage counseling if you're going to yank me into this one.
With 99 percentile industriousness.
Yes. Which is, by the way, the reason why each and every one of his books is dedicated to moi. Because without me, it would not have made it to the finish line on time.
Yes. And now another word for industriousness, because industriousness can be seen as a facet of that super trait, conscientiousness. So you mentioned the Big Five, and for listeners who've never heard of them before, personality psychologists have asked the question for over 100 years of what are the basic traits, and through techniques like factor analysis and using semantic approaches with language, or starting just with items, they've boiled it down to 5 super traits. And you can remember them with my favorite word, canoe, because I love to, or ocean. So conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness to experience, and extroversion. There's the 5. Now, conscientiousness and industriousness, we're talking the same thing. If you're talking about conscientiousness, you're also saying dutiful, organized. I guess we could throw industrious there. There's a few others. They're what we call facets. Now, interestingly, in the research on procrastination, I think of Clary Lay here, a retired professor from York University in particular. The correlation between conscientiousness and procrastination is very high and negative. The higher the conscientiousness or the industriousness in your case, the lower the procrastination. You just get things done. So if someone is low in conscientiousness, we could say that
I am 70, Tim. I'm 70. Just 99. I am 70. No. 70.
Well, 70, that's still pretty high.
Yes, but 99 is off limit.
Listen, I have to go get my kids from the train, and it's time to do it now. So I have to go.
Okay. Well, very nice to see you.
To talk with you.
Yes.
Yeah, but
safe drive.
I think that you know those things. I don't procrastinate. I'm a very productive man. I'm a very productive human being. I publish 4 books and I have my podcast. But when I live day by day with a 99 percentile, this is a Gaussian distribution. So the right tail, you know
way
what
out there.
it is way off limit. So what can I do? Or I cannot be. You know, let me just put it that way. I think that the big 5, that the personality traits have a very big genetic component, just like intelligence.
50%.
Okay, and if it is so, then there is nothing I can do to go from 70, which is relatively high, to 99. Okay,
and nor would I necessarily recommend it.
Very
I'm
good.
glad
Thank
your
you.
wife has stepped out of the room.
No, she just left.
Yeah, that's right. I'm glad she has, because she's not going to like what I have to say. But with any trait, when you take it to an extreme, it can become a liability as well.
Tell me about it.
It's because sometimes we even go so far, and I am not saying this about your wife. I want to make that really clear. I'm talking in the abstract now. But when we take any personality trait to an extreme, we can call that a personality disorder, because it becomes rigid. It becomes rigid, and sometimes waiting and not doing things frenetically can be important to one's well-being as well. So yeah, and the thing is, what you're talking about is the dynamic between people, that we all differ on these things, and I wanted
not to speak about dynamic, because I think this has to do more with, you know, the psychology of relationship, and I want to focus on the genetic part of, you know, I can't, how much, how big is the buffer that I can change? You can't take someone from introvert to extrovert. You can change a little bit, but you can't flip it. And
how much change? Yeah, that's a really,
you know, in my online course about productivity, I told my students, I have an online course that I teach, you know, productive systems, and in my course, some of my students are very productive and they just want to be more productive, but some are very non-productive. And I even tell them, if you give me a test, a big 5 test with below 30 on conscientiousness, I will give you your money back. In other words, I don't think I can help you. Okay?
Right.
What do you think about that?
I think there's some honesty in your response to that person, but it might be unfair in the sense that we can learn, this is what personality psychologists say, to act out of character. It won't be easy, and you will need, and this is something that I draw from Joel Anderson at Utrecht University and Joe Heath at the University of Toronto. They talk about the notion of extended will. You've mentioned willpower a couple of times, and we kind of think about willpower as an internal resource, much like we think of thinking. If I said to you, Roy, what's 3 times 3? You would say 9, no problem. And if I said, what's 487 times 963? You may not be so quick to answer that just using your head. But if I let you use a calculator or a paper and pencil, you do it quickly. That's called extended cognition. And what Joe and Joel argue is that we could think about extending our will. And we can do that in terms of helping with change in our lives too. If I'm trying to become more conscientious, I could look at making environmental affordances in my life, like learning to use a calendar more effectively. I said time management is necessary, but not sufficient. So I might have to develop some necessary skills around using a calendar, but also using other people and setting up the environment to help me. So I wouldn't be so quick to say that change was impossible, but just to be, I think it's fair to be honest and say it will be very difficult for you because you're going to be running against what you might say is bred in the bones, right? This is your nature. But we can act out of character. An introvert can learn to give brilliant lectures. My my thesis supervisor, my doctoral well, he's my supervisor for most of my graduate work. His name is Dr. Brian Little, and he is such an introvert. He would actually hide in washrooms between events so as not to have to interact with people. And I'm not saying anything out of school here. He would tell you that. He often tells that publicly. But he is such a gifted speaker. And so he can act very extroverted, but then he needs to recover. And that he needs to be able to replenish himself. So all of that, I would say, is we can't act out of character.
Just a second, because I think it's very important. When you say act out of character, let's say that I'm an introvert or I want to be more productive, I know how a 90 percentile industriousness people look like. I can act like them, okay? Or you mean something else, because you mentioned environmental help, and there is a great book from Richard Nisbet, which also I had the privilege of having on the show, The Person and the Situation. And this is basically the idea, okay? We tend, if, some things are very related to the personality, but some things are very related to the situation, to the environmental factors, okay? So it seems that procrastination is in the personality, but you say, yes, but you can make it, make the environment more accessible, more easy for doing less procrastination.
Yes. And go back to Joe and Joel again, Joel Anderson, Joe Heath, they talk about scaffolding. So you create the environment that scaffolds your success. In fact, I was just with Joel. I know that podcasts are, timeless, and so this won't make a lot of sense at that point. But I was just with this man over the weekend. So that was just for me a couple of days ago. He's on sabbatical here in North America. And he just told me this just the other day that not only does he think of scaffolding, but he says, so scaffolding is temporary. I'm now thinking of trellises as well, something that's actually in our lives, which we grow around, that supports us. So I think it's really important to think that we don't need to be, I'm reacting to your idea that if you get 30% or lower on your conscientiousness score, here's your money back, I can't help you. That maybe the solution there is, how do we do further research to understand what kind of trellis, to use that word, can help someone build the right kind of support in their lives so they can be more industrious. Now, they won't get to 99. I tend to agree with you there because of the nature of extremities. And if you try to act like your wife, it will wear you out, right? You
like your supervisor that after a big lecture, he needs to let me recover.
That's right. Whereas the extrovert only gets fueled up by it. He or she finishes a big lecture, or they finish a big lecture, and they're actually more energized, not less. It doesn't take anything from them. It actually feeds them. So yes, I'm not disputing the fact that personality makes a difference. I'm saying that because I'm thinking there's some listeners that are saying, look, I'm at the 99th percentile for procrastination. So basically you're telling me there's no hope, right? Because
I'm telling you from 100% knowledge that some of the listeners right now, and guys, it, choose to listen to this instead of doing meaningful homework assignments, okay? I know many people who substitute meaningful homework assignments in listening to my podcast because it is very educated and it is very sophisticated, and it's like cleaning the room. We don't clean the room, but it's a substitute that people are doing right now. People use my podcast for procrastination.
Yes, we never got as many volunteers for our research than when it was exam time or essays were due, because they say, oh, I'll go fulfill my experimental credits, right? I'm going to be, and of course, John Perry, who I mentioned in passing before, he wrote the wonderful book, The Art of Procrastination, a guide to you can look it up, The Art of Procrastination, John Perry. It's a great little book. He writes about the fact that at the very end of his book, he says, well, some people ask me what they should read next. He says, be careful. Reading about procrastination becomes procrastination itself. So yeah, we see it all the time.
Yeah, definitely. Now, before we move on, I don't want to go into the techniques yet, because again, I want to establish the theory. But before we move on to emotions, I think, you have a 4 decades experience. And 4 decade experience means to me that you started your work on procrastination way before smartphones and the internet and social media were available. My friend just told me yesterday that in South Korea, since people look at the phone the entire day, they put the traffic lights, on the ground, because people just don't look up. They look down. So the traffic light, the red versus green, is on the ground. And I think that the idea of procrastination become inevitably hard. Like the evil forces of procrastination, TikTok and social media and great YouTube and all the things that Facebook and WhatsApp, did to get your attention. It's an unfair fight. And maybe, please don't be mad, some of the techniques that we developed 20 years ago, just irrelevant now.
Okay. I'll really challenge that in a few ways. First, I want to just point out that I really don't have 4 decades of procrastination research. I would say I did 28 years. That's fine. Okay. I think it's just under 3 decades because I retired after 28 years at the university. And I really began my research on procrastination just after I finished my own PhD. My own PhD, by the way, was not on procrastination. It was on goal pursuit and how it made people feel. And the short story is that I realized that it was the things people said they were going to do that never did that really predicted their well-being. If they had a lot of those things, what we call procrastination, their well-being was in the toilet. So just a little aside. But to get right to your point, one of my favorite recent books in relation to the modern world we live in is The Distracted Mind, Ancient Brains in a High-Tech World by Adam Gazzaley. I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He's an amazing guy. He's an MD and a PhD neuroscientist, neurologist. He knows a lot about human brains and human nature. And in this wonderful book that captures this modern world of us being putting our road signs on the ground because we're looking down so much, that's a wonderful example. And when he gets to the end, he comes down with some simple strategies that he admits that he uses as well in this modern world. And it's a great title if you think about it. Ancient Brains in a High-Tech World. That goes back to our evolutionary things about this ancient brain running around in a modern world. Now, he says we have to learn to single task because we all know multitasking is a myth. I don't need to expand on that anymore. I'm sure your listeners know that. But let me tell you, I wrote it
in my book a few times. Yes.
Yeah, of course. And because it's really common knowledge now, even though many of us don't want to accept it. But
we can walk and chew a gum in the same times. But
but
this is about it.
Yeah, that's right. And don't do it while you're driving, many of you, because unless you're a good driver. So, but he says simple things like, so how do you deal with this modern world? And honestly, this is what he says: hide your phone, set a timer, take a break, and make sure the break's not on technology. So here's a guy that is an MD, PhD, neuroscientist, is really interested in all the phenomena you just talked about, and he boils it down to these simple strategies. In other words, you have to get it out of your face. It's like, how do you lose weight? Well, you don't fill your cupboard full of snacks. How do I stop drinking so much? Don't hang out in the bar. So I don't have. That's not my work. It's his. And
so let me rephrase. I totally agree with you. I think many people say about the Amish people in the US. The Amish are against technology. No. The Amish are not against technology. The Amish are against specific kind of technology. They have the most advanced tractors for the fields. They're just against a specific type of destructive technology according to their beliefs. But I think what you just said is precisely this. the only way to fight social media is to not go to bed with your smartphone.
Yes.
But if you go to bed with your smartphone, you are not strong enough. And even if you are, it will weaken, it will drain your battery. This constant fight. I think that this is a very important lesson. After all the years of research, you cannot fight those powers unless
temptations.
You say yes.
Yeah. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes. So again, if you don't choose to, close your writer, I think who wrote Deep Work, which I love.
Oh yeah, Deep Work. I should know this too, but it doesn't come to my mind right off the top of my head.
Just a second. Okay, but he said there is a timer on my Wi-Fi router.
Mm-hmm.
There is a timer on my Wi-Fi router when I, after 11, no internet. Okay, so with your permission, let's move to the emotion sides of procrastination. And again, the idea is, how do we face with negative emotions? Because I calendar and I track my daily task, my weekly task, my monthly and my semester. Since I'm in academia, so semester is a very good time frame. It's not a month, it's not a year. I think that semester is the perfect time frame to measure anything. Sure. And when I look about, I wanted to do this task last week, so I move it to this week, but I didn't do it this week. I said, why? Why didn't I do this specific task? So it seems to me, when I'm dealing with procrastination, that eventually I need to sit down with the task, with the unwanted task, and say, hi, Roi, what is the problem that you're having with this task? But according to what I understand, this process is a cognitive process, not an emotional process. So,
all right. So let's go back just a half a second. It's Cal Newport we were trying to think of.
Cal Newport.
Yeah. And at the same time, we can think about when we're talking about calendars, which we're going to now, there's this whole notion of time blocking as well. So that deep work can often be connected with that practical strategy of time blocking. But here it leads us right into my focus on emotions. So I get my calendar set up, and I'm like you. If I showed your listeners my calendar, they think there was something desperately wrong with me, like you were teasing your wife about, in the sense that I am fastidiously organized. Every 15 minutes of my day is accounted for ahead of time or after.
If it's not rude, I made you a co-host. So if it's okay with you,
I won't. It's too revealing.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I could.
I tried.
Yeah, I have done that before, and then I look at my calendar and go, "Oh my goodness, someone could pause that right now and really take me apart." So I've learned not to do that, because there are I put everything in there.
Okay,
frankly.
15 minutes.
15-minute blocks all day long, and I do intention updates. Things have to move. The best laid plans are only the best laid plans. Some things take longer, but they're in there, and I do that. I'll tell you first why I do it, because first it takes the cognitive load off. I don't have to think about what I'm doing. I think about things from a temporal perspective. A to-do list is just a list of things, but it's got no reality contact. If I have to put it into my schedule, I think, when do I actually think I'm going to do that? And now I'm starting to think about it in the real world. And I can do a forensic audit. Like if I did show you my calendar right now, I could go back to last week and say, is this the person I want to be? Am I spending the time in places that I want to spend my time? And that gets to that very existential issue of, this is my life. Am I living it the way I want to? But your point is important. It sounds like it's all cognitive, but no. Imagine I'm taking deep work to heart, Cal Newport stuff, and I'm using time blocking, which I often do. And then I get to that point in the day where it says, okay, it's 11 o'clock. I've got to sit down now with Roi for the podcast. This is what happens. I don't want to. I don't feel like it. I'll feel more like it tomorrow. And it's not cognitive now. Fast brain. I'm having an emotional reaction. Sometimes we call it the amygdala hijack. I'm reacting to that now, not about with thinking, but feeling. And so this is why I argue that procrastination is an emotion regulation issue, because I'm about to put off doing the task, and I can self-deceive and say that I'm just going to do an intention update and move it. But actually what I'm doing is avoiding it. And so even when you sit down later to think, why isn't this task getting done? That's a cognitive process. But I think it's going to take you to an emotional place. It's not getting done because I'm so frustrated I have to do it, or I resent the fact that I ever got this assigned to me, or it is so boring, who would ever want to do it, or I'm really afraid, like I don't know if I can do this. And all those negative emotions, as I said earlier, we've learned I can get rid of those negative emotions if I get rid of the task. So that's why I would argue that even though on the surface it seems cognitive, the underlying aversiveness is emotional.
But okay, I have so many questions about your calendar. I'm fascinated by that. Is it also 15 minutes blocking for January 2024 or just for this week?
Oh, that's a great question. I could go back for a couple decades in my calendar. It's not as good back then as it is the last few years. I will put things in ahead. I know I have an eye appointment next January, but I don't have, most of it's wide open, except for those regularly occurring things. I typically get up around 5:15 in the morning because I love the morning. And I have things like in there that are regular for me. Make the coffee, put away the dishes, take the dogs out, read the news.
Make the coffee is on your calendar. Make the coffee, take the coffee.
Make the coffee, put the dishes away, take the dogs out. Now, I know in some ways that seems kind of redundant, but it allows me to examine where I'm spending my time. Like everything takes time. Everything does. And then I also have in there at exactly 6:25, I switch gears to helping my son because he's just in high school still. I'm a dinosaur dad. If I procrastinated on anything, it was having children in my life, and I'm so glad I have them. So I usually make his lunch and breakfast so we can have a chance just to talk together, and all that's in there.
And when do you scroll in social media, or you don't even feel an urge to do it? When do you waste your time? There is a wasting time periods, like a reward that Carl Newport speak of.
Yes, I'm glad you went there. It is a reward in a sense. In the morning, after coffee, dogs are fed, dishes put away, I read the newspaper. So I've subscribed to the New York Times and a few other things, and sometimes that can degenerate into looking at other sources. But I got off of social media quite a while ago. I was quite an early adopter of social media, Facebook and other things. But then I realized what a time sink it was. So I got off them, and I try not to be on them.
And for the newspaper, I'm sorry, I'm still so fascinated. I'm sorry. I told you that
Sure,
I will raise my finger, but I'm totally fascinated. I'm totally fascinated. There is a timer to say, hey, you should stop reading the New York Times and go do something else.
Oh, well, there's a hard stop in my day if it's a school day to stop, because I know I have to get my son on that school bus. It gets more complicated than that because recently he didn't have a bus driver and I was driving a bunch of kids to school. That changed my day too. So yes, to answer your question directly, I do schedule in time that are breaks, and they're for me because I know I need to break, and that can include a nap. Right? I can say I'm 68 now. I can go have a nap on that chair that I'm pointing at. You can't see I'm pointing at. It's right next to me. And so, yeah, I have a nap.
And there is a nap section on your calendar?
And my calendar is all color-coded so that I can at a glance, especially when I was an academic, a working academic like you, because you talked about the semester, I had research a different color than teaching, a different color than administration. And I could glance at my calendar and say, how much research did I do last week? Am I doing any writing? Okay, is all my time being taken up with administrative tasks? What about recreation? They're all different. And then I
Just a
embed
second,
in
just a
that.
second. So if you are in the research, because again, Tim, I'm talking about myself right now, okay? Not
Okay.
about you. If you are in the middle of the research caller and
Yes.
your head of department call and say, listen, I need this email, very urgent, okay?
Hmm.
And this is administrative. It's not research, okay?
Hmm. Hmm.
What do you do? Or you keep your phone shut so you can't answer your head of I don't know, your dean.
Yes, you gave the answer that I was going to suggest, is that right now my phone is on airplane mode. So you can leave me a message, but you can't bother me because I'm with Roy right now. Like, you wouldn't want me to have my phone on right now. And so we have to protect that time. In fact, Robert Boyce many years ago wrote a book about quick start faculty. And he talked about the fact that you have to protect time for your writing and your research. And I knew many very successful academics who would get in, they realized the way life works. They had to get to work very early and use those quiet time in the morning when no one is going to ask them for things to get their writing done. So they recognized that realistically, the only time they could do that was then. But absolutely, if you want to get something done, you have to protect it. And that's that notion of time blocking. Yeah.
Okay.
But I do that for everything. I think my recreation time is just as important because it's about my health and well-being. And that, I can look at that as a balanced portfolio. I can look at my calendar, look at the colors and say, is that the life that I want to have?
But just a second, again, you said this is a to-do list, but to-do list has nothing to do with reality. You can show me your calendar, and my question will be, okay, but how does this calendar connect to the real Tim in his real life? How you need, in order for this calendar to be meaningful, you have to be committed to this calendar. And God's know that there are not many people, like a fraction of people, that can be committed to a 15 minutes chunks of calendar.
Well,
so
that's great. What a great question. And this is early in my graduate work, I looked at the notion of psychological hardiness. And this was a very existential study that was done by Suzanne Cabasa and I think it was Salvador Matti that did this work. And they saw that one of the things, there were three factors, and I'm not going to go into that too deeply because we'll get distracted. But you had to be committed, and you use this word, committed to self. Commitment to self was a huge aspect of one's psychological hardiness. My calendar is an outward visible sign of my commitment to self, as is me not answering the phone from my dean when I'm doing my writing. That what I'm looking at in my calendar isn't some foreign device, some aspiration like, oh, I'd like to be organized, so I think I should have a calendar. My calendar is my external thinking tool. It doesn't own me, I own it. And I think this is really important for people who don't use one yet. They go, oh, I wouldn't want that calendar to own me. It doesn't. It's my tool. It doesn't tell me what to do. It's helping me think what's next. I can tell you right now that when we finish up today, I have to go do a really awful task. It's awful for me, at least. I have to change all the fluids in my tractor, my hydraulic fluids, my front axle fluids. I really don't like doing this job because I'm not the best mechanic in the world, but I need to do it. It's on my calendar, and I treat that with serious commitment. It would be easy for me to go, oh, I'll feel more like doing it tomorrow. No, I won't. I never feel like doing this job. And the fact is, we're having a very unusually warm fall, and it makes a lot of sense for me to do it now when my fingers aren't frozen to that metal on the tractor. So Tim is going to be under the tractor probably an hour from now, getting very dirty and very frustrated. But that's because I made a commitment to doing that task. And that's a commitment to Tim. That's really important. And even if we get very specific, if you take someone like Peter Gallwitzer, who's written so well on implementation intentions. And we can unpack that in a minute, but an implementation intention helps us get things done. He was very quick to say, even in the 1990s, when he defined the construct, without a commitment to the task, this trick won't help, right? An implementation intention isn't going to help you if you're not really committed to the task. So I put two kinds of commitment on the table, and you used the word first: commitment to self and commitment to the task. Without those, you're just wallowing around.
I think, there is some word that Israeli really don't like, which is discipline. I think it comes from the army, in the army, and we are obliged to go to the army. We need to be disciplined. And discipline is a very bad word in Israeli or Hebrew, modern Hebrew context. But you can treat it differently, because discipline is a very good word in in Jewish context. And you can say that discipline is the fact that you don't need to fight with yourself for every decision that you make.
Yes.
But again, when I listen to you, I say, okay, so Tim is one of those guys who tends to be, he is just self-disciplined. Okay, he has nothing to teach me. Therefore, I need to go very fast to the techniques, okay? Because from what you say right now, okay, and this is my tool. I control my calendar. My calendar doesn't control me. It's okay. You just, the distance between the two of us just go further and further. Okay,
that's good. Glad you're
could you
good
please
interview.
Help me to understand that this is not a biological genetic.
It's not. This is a learned skill. I floundered a lot in my life. Because I love the way you put about what discipline is. It's about not fighting against oneself. Like I love the Zen story that I tell so often about what I think is real wisdom. And that is a monk, not necessarily a young monk. A monk comes to a new monastery, finds the headmaster and says, "I'm here, teach me." And the headmaster says, "Have you finished eating your breakfast?" And he says, "Yes." He said, "Then wash your bowl." And as the story goes, at that moment, he was enlightened. Well, to me, that's just profoundly important. Like, wash your bowl. Don't make any more of it than that. Except most of us, when we look at the bowl, we go, "I don't feel like it." Certainly the bowl could sit there till later. When I have a few bowls to wash, I'll feel more like washing later. No, that's where that notion comes in. Instead of all that thinking, just wash the bowl. And instead of all this thinking that old calendars are for other types of people, just put it down on the calendar and live your life. Right? Use the calendar as a tool.
I need to just to ask you about one word that you just said, just. Okay,
just, yeah.
Because I think that many of the fights or arguments that I have with my wife is I really don't understand how you don't do it the same time I just asked. So my question is, because you have a vast psychology experience, can you understand that some people treat this just with, "I have no idea how to tackle this giant mountain"?
Good. Wow. Here's a big hug coming from Canada to Israel to you. Because I did this podcast for years and wrote a book, I've had people contacting me from all over the world, and it's always wonderful to hear from people. And I remember one person wrote to me an email and said, "Dr. Pychyl, it's so nice that you share your knowledge. And I really kind of understand this just get started. But sir, if I could just get started, I wouldn't have a procrastination problem. Can you do a little better than that, please?" And I laughed like you're laughing. And I thought, yeah, that's fair. And I often say to people, don't use that word just, but I use it all the time. So let me just back up and say, I had to think about that and say, yeah, what's implicit in there for me? What is it that's happening in me that when I hear just get started, it doesn't just stop me in my tracks? So we go to David Allen. David Allen is famous for the book, Getting Things Done. And he said so clearly, what we need to think about is not the whole project, because that's overwhelming. Like you say, I don't even know how to do it. He asked this wonderful question that I made my own, which is, what's the next action? See, what's the next action? And I ask myself the question all the time. In fact, when I get out to my tractor, because I'm not going to feel like doing it, I'll say, what's the next action? Go get the drain pan for the fluids, Tim, and a wrench. That's the next action. And you see, now I'm doing the task. I'm not standing there fretting and reminding myself how much I hate it.
And
What's
this
the
is
next
also
action?
on your calendar. When you
No.
say on your calendar, fix the tractor,
That's it. No, it just says fix the tractor. I've given myself a big block of time. When I get to the tractor, it's what's the next action? That could be a whole other side conversation about whether that might be an interesting strategy for someone to break it down. Because when I look at that calendar entry, I got to tell you, it gives me the heebie-jeebies. I don't want to do it. But what's the next action?
And we have the Hofstadter law that things always takes longer than what you expected, even considering the Hofstadter law. So when you give your block of time for fixing the tractor, how do you know what if it's insufficient? Because I love the Pomodoro techniques. You switch things from task to just time. Just focus 25 minutes. Okay, this is great. But in the tractor, you can't say, okay, I will do 2 Pomodoros on the tractor. You can't leave the tractor wide open, with all the
yes, you're right.
The wires.
Everything drained on the ground.
You need to finish this job no matter what today.
Yes, but Roi, because I've done this for a while, and because I do keep daily records of how long things take, I'm really quite good at estimating time. You're right. And I did give myself a little extra time for this one because it's there's a little bit of unknown and the world's not perfect. I could make a mistake. There's no doubt about that. But you see, the key thing about all this is that it's not about self-discipline. It's not about me forcing myself to do stuff. It's about me living the life I want to live. So if there's someone who's saying, oh, I'm such a terrible procrastinator, I say, well, what, you don't want to be a procrastinator? No, I don't. I want to do that task. Then I'd say to you, what's the next action? What's the next action you would take if you were going to do this task, even though I know you don't want to? And you make that action as tiny as possible. And then you look at that action, you say, well, I can do that. And you see now you're moving in the right direction. And on my bad days, I have to do that over and over and over again. But at the end of the day, I got a lot of stuff done. And those are my bad days. The good days, I do what's the next action, and I prime the pump, and there I'm off doing it. Yeah.
I read research recently about students that they have a very big procrastination problem, and they were told exactly the same thing. When you go, when you come home, before watching television, before eating, before doing anything, just take your notebook, take your book, open it in the correct page, in the correct place, put the pencil on the notebook. That's it. Mm-hmm. But once the book is already there and the notebook is already there, and you did the entire ceremony, you're more likely to, just take a glimpse or do something. Mm-hmm. Okay. And again, so, okay, I want to go from having no calendar whatsoever. It's not my situation right now, because I used to consider myself productive up until the conversation with you. No, the conversation with you. I know with my wife, it is very simple for me. I say, okay, she's off limit. She's off limit. It is very simple for me to live with this. Okay. This is, but okay, I have no calendar whatsoever, and I want to move towards your calendar. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, one thing and one technique is, okay, just focused on the next tiny itchy thing.
Okay. But no, if you're going to start to do a calendar, this is going to go back to the 1970s, and a technique that I learned from someone else, and I'm trying to think of his name. It was a small self-help book. It was called the Unschedule, Unschedule. And that was, take out your calendar and write in all the things that you have to do just to keep yourself alive, that you do every week. When do you get up? When do you make breakfast, shower? When do you buy your groceries? When do you cook? Because if you start there, then you look at your week and go, wow, there's not as much time as I thought. Because if we think I'll do it next week, it's like next week is some big blank, pristine emptiness without any contingencies. And so I love the unschedule. If you're just going to start a calendar, it kind of goes back to the question of, Tim, do you have anything in your schedule for 2024, 2025? Yeah, I've got get up, make coffee, make my son breakfast, lunch, those sorts of things. Things that I know are repeating, but it doesn't have other things because I don't have anything there yet. But all of us have an unschedule. And so you could do that. When do you take the bus? How long does that take? Whatever it is. And then you can start filling in the things that are your goals. Yeah.
It seems to me that your retirement was a massive event on your calendar, because for someone who has a 15 minutes block and he goes from, being a full-time professor to retirement, you need to fill those things with a lot of, you can't
but
waste.
Then I always had a very busy personal life as well. When my children were born, I'm a Canadian and I had a sled dog team. I live on a farm. I had horses and chickens. I had two small children, a job. So in some ways it made me go, oh, good. I got time. I got more time. I was doing things. I wasn't getting enough sleep.
If you have a farm, so then I think it is all settled, because farm let you, invite so many walk. Okay. So one thing again is do the unscheduled. Just put all the things on your schedule and say, wow, I don't have so much time. But let me tell you, my friends, my students right now, they dealing with something that I wouldn't say completely different. They just want, let me just scroll for just 1 or 2 YouTube videos. And then when they check their YouTube history, it is unimaginable. It is not the time that we don't have because we need to eat and we need to shower. It is a time that we don't have because we waste it so much.
Yeah, and we waste it in a very subtle way. We make rational decisions over irrationally short periods of time. It's a wonderful way we self-deceive. It will only take me a minute to look at TikTok. It's true. You can look at it for 1 minute, but a minute later you face the same decision. And then as the joke goes, 3 hours later, you wonder why you're watching a picture of a seal hitting a kayaker with an octopus or whatever it was, a squid.
Are you familiar with the word binge?
Binge, oh yes. People binge, yeah.
Yeah, so people will never see a 10-hour video or film like Holocaust by Claude Lanzmann, but doing it, for friends. So,
a full series of 4 or 5 seasons of a TV show, because the other thing is that they're set up to do that. The next show begins in 10, 9, 8. In fact, they've even shortened that, as I've seen.
Yes, 5.
So
5,
yeah,
4, 3,
absolutely. People binge.
What can you tell these people who have Netflix, or you say, guys, if you have Netflix, if you have social media, if you have Twitter, if you have Facebook, and if you're constantly, have all the notifications there when you're trying to study, I really can't help you. Which leads us to, I think another of Cal Newport books is digital minimalism. Okay.
Right.
You just can't be productive with all this constant hiss.
Yes. But then I think there's a larger question one must ask themselves first before they get into digital minimalism, which is, are you living the life you want to live? And if not, what is that life? Who is it you want to be? You have to have that possible self that provides motivation. The distance between actual self and one's possible self is a motivator. And until we start to articulate who we want to become and how that compares to where we are, will we want to use any of the tools that we're talking about or other people talk about? So I want listeners to take that to heart too, is that if you're really happy with the way you're living your life, why would you listen to anybody talking about using a calendar like this? You must think that they're just terribly anal retentive, as Freud might say. They're just way too uptight. It's only going to be a tool for you if it's a tool for change, and there's only going to be a change for you if your possible self is different than your actual self. And then on top of all that, you have to think, is there a readiness for change? Are you actually ready to do this right now? And if you're not, then you're not, right? And there's no magic here. Roi and Tim can't change your life. Roi and Tim can tell you techniques that would be helpful if you want to change.
I want to please, if you can expand on the idea of changes within your plan. I come from the magic industry, and in the magic industry, there is a big debate versus a written script versus ad lib. I don't want to be stick to a written script because it restricts me, and I want to be spontaneous, etc. But on the other side, people say, listen, you can only be spontaneous if you can go back to a written script. If something messed up, you have, your safety net. You have your safety net to go. And Mike, whenever in my short history, I'm almost 42 right now, when I tried to be so precise on my calendar, just like you, okay? I have 4 kids, and I in the show business and in academia and in many other things. Something always shows up. So, and then I need to shift, I need to change. I don't follow the procedure, I don't follow what I wanted. And maybe, just like what you said, listen, I know how much time it's going to take me to fix the tractor, because this is not the first time I'm doing it, okay?
That's right.
But what if this is the first time or the second time, okay?
Well, two thoughts come to mind. I tend to agree with you that you can't really improvise or be spontaneous unless life is under control. Otherwise, it's really just chaos, and you're always fighting panic and guilt. And so when I live by my structure, when opportunities arise, I go, great, I can do that. Everything's under control. Now, the other part, a very practical thing, is I do make intention updates. I can move things, right? In fact, just before we got online here, we have a cottage to close because it's winter coming. And my brother-in-law and I need to do this, but it's going to rain on the weekend. And so I said to him, I can come tomorrow if you want me to come tomorrow. I can be spontaneous, right? I can change things. I can make an intention update. Intention updates are always possible. That's not a problem. And the other thing that came to mind was this, is that, sure, I might not know how long some things are going to take. In fact, I don't know how long it's going to take us to close the cottage, because this is something my father-in-law always did, but he's very ill right now. So there's a lot of unknown there. But the key thing here, and this is a concept that's really important in terms of procrastination, is I can't be a perfectionist, right? That, yeah, life's not perfect, and I'm going to do my best, and that's going to be good enough. And this is really something we found in our research. Gordon Flett from a Canada Research Chair at York University did some of the earliest work here. He's an expert on perfectionism. That one type of perfectionism, socially prescribed perfectionism, is very highly correlated with procrastination. Now, to understand this,
I always say this. I always say exactly the same thing. If you're a perfectionist and you're doing stuff, this is BMW. This is great. But most people use the term perfectionism for doing nothing.
Oh, geez. Well, that's the antithesis then.
Yeah. But
there's more than one flavor of perfectionism.
Yes.
In the literature, there's at least 2 broad categories. We can say perfectionistic concerns, perfectionistic strivings. The concerns is all that rumination and thinking about trying to live up to other people's expectations. It freezes us in our tracks and we procrastinate. Perfectionistic strivings, or self-oriented perfectionism, is just, I'm trying to do my best job. Like, I'm really invested in doing the best I can. If you're really trying to be perfect, that's never healthy. But if you're just trying to do a great job, good for you. But if you are internalizing the values of others and you're worried that this could take longer, what if I screw up? You're liable to procrastinate. So that's what came to mind as you were talking about people listening and thinking about their calendar. And I don't know how much time to estimate. The world's not perfect,
I
and
think
it
that we
might
have,
screw up.
I think that we have, Winnicott gave us a good enough mother, and I think we
Yes.
should expand it to just good enough. Just do something. My PhD
Yes.
advisor, Professor Boss Ben Moshe, always told me, most people are wrong at not doing. Their mistake coming from the idea that they are not doing. Just do. And your mistake from doing will be much more valuable, and you will learn much more than your mistake of not doing. Which leads me,
Yes.
you have 20 years of experience, and you said in the beginning of our conversation, I know too much about procrastination than to fall into this trap.
Yes.
And you think that that the theory help you become a better person. And I think that the term better person actually fit, because you live the life that you want to live by not procrastinating.
Mm-hmm.
Is it true?
I think so. Yeah, very much so.
And my
I
question
mean,
is,
but I would add, I have lots of regrets and remorse in my life. I have to deal, I'm still a human being, but in terms of how I spend my time in relation to my goals and the things I'm trying to become, are aligned. But that,
okay, very good.
yeah, just make that very important distinction.
But since you better yourself throughout time, throughout 20 years of experience, can I ask what was like the number one tool, insight, epiphany that said, okay, I think that this one really made a difference? From my student, I can say that the Pomodoro thing, switching from task-oriented to time-oriented really made a very good shift in their productive lives. But for you, what was this, like one technique or insight or epiphany?
It wasn't the Pomodoro technique for me, because for some people I know that after a while the magic wears off with it, because we realize it's a very Sartrean thing, in the sense of we create these, as he called them, guardrails, and then we realize the only thing that keeps that guardrail there is me, and then it loses its power. Like I'm the person turning on the timer and living up to the 20 minutes or the 25 minutes, and then it all falls apart again. So that's why the technique might be a good first step, but I think we're always left facing ourselves in a profound way. So for me, it's been very much a mindful attitude towards all these things. I mentioned Joseph Goldstein in passing as a mindfulness teacher, and very much so in terms of self-compassion and mindfulness, particularly these two phrases. One we've heard already: what's the next action? Actually, three phrases I'm going to say. What's the next action? These all dance together. It's okay to feel this way. In other words, I'm having all these negative emotions related to this task. I don't want to. I resent this, or I'm bored by this, or I'm anxious about it. It's okay to feel this way. And the final one comes from someone I read and I've read that I admire greatly, Parker Palmer. Amongst his many wonderful books, he's a Quaker. He wrote a book called The Courage to Teach. And as a professor, you might enjoy that book a great deal, The Courage to Teach. And in it, he wrote, I may have fear, but I need not be this fear, because I can work from some other place in my inner landscape. And I just generalize that to, I can have this emotion. I need not be this emotion. So that's the mindfulness piece. I'm aware of it, but I don't let it own me. I can put my attention somewhere else. And you see, if I take those three things together on any given day, I can keep living the life I want. Because you've been so honest, and your wife has been so honest about personality, and we've only talked about one trait, industriousness or conscientiousness. Neuroticism. I score very high on neuroticism in terms of proneness to worry, depression, social self-consciousness. And so I have to deal with a lot of inner demons. I'll get up someday.
By the way, on neuroticism, she is two. 99 versus 2. She cannot understand sad people. How can you be sad in this wonderful world?
She's so lucky.
99 and 2.
Yeah. You married the right woman, I'll tell you.
She can't be a shrink.
My partner's very low in neuroticism as well, and it does our marriage good things, because I can be overreactive because I have these, I always just summarize it, I'm wired too tightly. But all that is to say that in any given day, as much as I'm organized, and got this calendar and all the rest of it, I have a very volatile inner life. And so I have to say to myself, it's okay to feel this way. You can have this feeling. You don't have to be this feeling. So there's my honesty with you in terms of you've been really honest with personality. So I have my own liability.
My own demons.
My own demons.
Yes.
And perhaps that feeds into somewhat of my own bias in science to say, I see a lot of evidence for emotion-focused coping as opposed to, see, like all scientists are human, as opposed to saying, I think procrastination is a question of temporal discounting, which I
see a great Nature paper right now.
I hope you write it.
It's like, the distinction between I have a pain and I'm in pain. Okay, don't let the pain rule over you. And I since I'm an old school Jew, I must tell that in ancient Jewish wisdom, we now tend to synonym the self with what he thinks. You are what you think. You are what you think. But in Judaism, you are what you do.
Yes.
And your thoughts are much less important than your actions.
And in Buddhism grabs the notion we are not our thoughts. We shouldn't identify with our thoughts. It's a different ethic than what you've just described, but I think it's another one I want to share with listeners to say that's profoundly important, because we think all sorts of things. Like, even I'll feel more like it tomorrow. I work better under pressure. Not only as self-deception, but I don't need to identify with those thoughts. I can see them for what they are.
The ancients were much smarter than what we usually think.
Yep. The Stoics in particular.
Yes. Thank you so much for your insightful conversation and so many smart things to think about. I usually end with 2 questions. One is, could you give me a productivity tip? But since the entire conversation was about productivity tips, I would substitute for, what are you doing right now after the retirement? What are the most important philosophical or mind things on your life right now?
Wow. Well, it's a very much a spiritual journey. If in my earliest years, I did go to seminary and struggle with really classic spiritual pursuits, and I'm still that seeking spiritually, and very much of it revolves around mindfulness and understanding these things. We talked about Sam Harris briefly earlier. Exploring more of that. So that occupies a great deal of my time and interest. And in retirement, it's to be the best family man I can, right? To scaffold the life for my children, so that they get on their feet well, not to stifle them or to try to shape them, but to enable them, to be there for them. That's the easiest way to put it, to be there for them. Yeah, that's what I'm up to.
We usually say in our family, just don't win too much. This is what we want. This is what we strive for. Don't win too much.
Don't win too much. Interesting. Well, I liked your Winnicott quote, the good enough. I want to be the good enough father, yes. I guess. Yeah.
And the other thing is, any books, that you read recently that changed your mind. You mentioned few. You mentioned The Destructive Mind. You mentioned The Courage to Teach. And you mentioned, of course, David Allen, Getting Things Done, in the 7 Habits. And we have a lot. We mentioned a lot of things, but if you just need to just focus or give me just one book that you said, if you came so far, you might want to read this book.
Holy mackerel, that's not fair.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I read a lot of books, especially I do a lot of audio books because I'm on my tractor a lot and I do a lot of chores and I drive a lot. Um, I have a whole raft of books but I'm going to I'll stick to your one book. See, it's going to relate, unfortunately, and this is so funny because we talked about this will be the third time we raised Sam Harris's name, and he's famous for his attitude towards free will. And oftentimes he'll say, for example, as of a way to demonstrate the lack of choice, is he'll say, "I want you to pick a movie star," and of course, what pops into your mind wasn't some process you went through consciously. And when you say to me, "Pick a book," I'm thinking, I don't even know how to do this. Like things are popping into my brain, and I think, where did that come from? So it's really quite perverse that it's a demonstration that I really don't have free will here. Things are just coming into my head, and I don't know why. But if I stick to a theme in my spiritual journey around Buddhism in particular, Pema Chodron. I've been reading a lot of Pema Chodron. So you can pick any one of her titles because many of the books are similar. I'd have to pull up my phone to tell you. Well, I can do that. We've got all sorts of time, I suppose.
I had Ross Jeffries on the show. He specialized in NLP, and he mentioned Shinzen Yang, which is also a Jewish guy that introduced the East to the West. But I never came across, up until now, this Goldstein guy.
Oh, you have never? Oh, yeah. Joseph Goldstein is really quite well known in North America. He's established in the 70s a meditation center on the East Coast in Barre, Maine. But okay, I gotta pick one, eh? Geez, I've read so many. Okay, here's one I didn't think I would say. This one is called "Can't Stop Thinking." And I've never recommended this. Can't Stop Thinking. It's written by Nancy Collier. And actually, the the foreword was done by Stephen Bodian, who's quite a well-known Buddhist. But Nancy Collier, Can't Stop Thinking. And it really speaks to, being very honest here, about my own work on myself in terms of my emotional.
Can't stop thinking how to let go of anxiety and free yourself from obsessive rumination.
And how to really own the idea that I'm not my thoughts. There. Wow. That book I've listened to quite a few times because it's my own work right now. My work on rumination.
And again, if I need to summarize our entire conversation and what you said in your wonderful book, you can't have a bandage, a plaster. You can't have a very superficial things to put on procrastination. The mere idea of procrastination is that we are afraid of facing ourselves. We are afraid to facing the person that we want to be. And in order to tackle this thing, we need massive weapons. And the spirituality journeys that you mentioned, but other journeys, can be very helpful. But again, it will not be solved with a stitch and with just a bandage. Yes.
But to be fair, think about Richard Taylor, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2017. And he says we're more like Homer Simpson than we are Homo economicus. And he's written a wonderful book with another co-author whose name is escaping me, called Nudge. Some of the techniques we've mentioned today can nudge you in the right direction. Because on the one hand, what you've summarized there is profound change, and it could overwhelm people. Like you're saying, I've got to come to existential grips with my whole personhood to defeat procrastination. Yeah, that would be good. But in the meantime, you can nudge yourself in the right direction by saying, what's the next action? Or by saying, in situation X, I'll do behavior Y. Like, don't make it bigger than that as you're making these baby steps towards change. I just want to end there in the sense that I wouldn't want to leave anybody with the idea that it's momentous change. It's just going to take some time. Yeah.
And again, the idea is that your calendar enable you to reflect 1 week ago, 2 weeks ago, 1 month ago, 10 years ago, and say, this is a measurable metric. And I use the term over and over on my podcast, a measurable metric, to see whether you're conducting the lives that you want to conduct. I think
Yes.
that just the mere idea that you can say, how really did I do last week? I think that this is like, and when you see truth, with colors up in front of your eyes, now it's like you're going on the scale and you say, Loda, I don't know, 250. Wow, this is serious stuff. Tim, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
It's really been a pleasure to meet you, Roy.
Wow. I'm not into the psychology. I major in computer science, but I love, yes, I'm in the field of artificial intelligence and computer science and theoretical computer science, but I love the idea of psychology so much. I think
obviously.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the lion's share of my books on my library are psychology oriented.
Well, you're a well-rounded person, and good luck with not destroying the world with AI.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure, Roy. Really nice to meet you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.